My name is Glenn Pierce-Soros, and I'm the Senior Director of International Relations and Special Projects with Sustainable Energy for All. Welcome to everyone to this webinar on Paris alignment of power sector finance flows, India and Indonesia. We're very happy that you joined us today, and certainly look forward to a longer shelf life of this webinar on our YouTube channel later, for those of you who are interested in seeing this later, or who are seeing this later. I would like to start with a few words of background on where we stand in terms of the ambitious Paris alignment of power sector finance flows. We saw in Glasgow many ambitious political commitments that were announced, from India's commitment to a net zero by 2070, to Indonesia's ambitious commitment to a net zero by 2060 or sooner, and many other countries as well. We know, however, that we need to follow through on these commitments. And the power sector in particular is going to be one of those key sectors that will be able to drive progress towards Paris-aligned goals. Within the power sector, we're also keenly aware that we need to unlock financing as an important first step to making sure that we're able to get on a trajectory that meets those ambitious political commitments announced in Glasgow. We will then, we have then, between SEforALL and Climate Policy Initiative, identified an opportunity to understand better exactly where financing flows are headed in the power sector in two very important countries for the global net zero target, India and Indonesia. As part of our broader energizing finance series, SEforALL and CPI have developed these two case briefs for India and Indonesia. And in this event, we're very pleased to be presenting you with the findings from both of these knowledge briefs. Each of the knowledge briefs presents an analysis of the power sector investments to assess progress against each country's climate and energy goals. These analyses aim to provide some preliminary insights into what we think will be the new energy investments that will need to happen in order to start on the pathway for a more rapid progression towards the net zero objectives. I would like to walk you through very quickly the agenda that we will be going through today. We will, and perhaps we can put that agenda slide up. We will be splitting this webinar into two parts. The first part will be focused on Indonesia, and we will begin with a presentation of the findings of this knowledge brief. We'll then be followed up by a panel discussion, and we're very pleased to be joined by three experts from Indonesia to discuss exactly the findings and where we take this now. The second part will then shift to focus on India, and we'll start again with a brief presentation of the findings in terms of the Paris alignment of power sector finance flows in India. And again, we're very happy and pleased to be joined by three experts on the Indian side, who will be able to help us think through what's next and what are some of the challenges that we need to address or that need to be addressed in terms of supporting the energy transition in India. So without further ado, I would like to just say a few words on why India and Indonesia are so important and why we've decided to focus on these two countries. My first point is that we do need to start thinking about what our world looks like in 2030, in 2040, and 2050. And if we start thinking about what that world looks like, we recognize that, as IEA has empirically shown, over the next decade, annual clean energy investments in emerging markets and developing economies will be extremely important for that world that we will have in 2040 and 2050. IEA estimates that in these emerging and developing economies, the investment needs to grow more than 7 times annually, from less than about 150 billion to over $1 trillion. This would help put the world on track to achieve Paris Agreement targets. Both India and Indonesia have made significant progress in terms of electrification and have nearly closed the gap in terms of this important Sustainable Development Goal 7 target. The main challenge then for these countries is to transform their energy systems to align with their ambitious NDC targets. Both countries, as I mentioned at the beginning, have already made some very ambitious policy targets, announced some very ambitious policy targets. India planning to build up to 450 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity, and recently has even increased that, raised that upwards to 500 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity by 2030. And Indonesia plans to have renewables comprise nearly 50% of its power generation capacity in the future. These certainly require transformative actions and transformative financing at scale. Which brings me to the point of the importance of developing wide-ranging instruments and approaches in terms of financing. We already know that this is not only a public financing endeavor. We recognize the importance of private financing into this net zero pathway. And so we do want to stimulate this type of thinking in terms of what are the goals, what are the inputs, what are the instruments that are needed to achieve the ambitious goals announced by both countries. I'd like then to begin to understand a little bit more of the knowledge brief that we have prepared, and would invite my colleague Tisra Mafida, Associate Director of Climate Policy Initiative, CPI in Indonesia, to walk us through some of the findings that we found in this knowledge brief. Tisa, if I can turn the floor over to you, and for the next 15 minutes, perhaps share with us some of these ideas that we have identified in this effort between SEforALL and CPI. Over to you, Tisa.
Thank you very much, Glenn. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My esteemed greetings to the panelists today. Mr. Charles Koh, Head of International Subsidiary Banking at HSBC Indonesia, Ibu Kamia Handayani, Vice President of Climate Change and Safeguard at PLN, and Pak Haris Yahya, Director at DG of Renewable Energy at the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources. It is a pleasure to be here, and I'm excited to be presenting our study on Indonesia's power sector financing flows, because we know that Indonesia has made several policy signals in support of renewable energy and announced targets that put Indonesia on a pathway to achieving net zero emissions by 2060. I think Glenn mentioned, the urgency that the whole world is, moving towards recognizing the sense of emergency with the climate crisis. And, countries, including Indonesia, have announced targets to become aligned with Paris Agreement commitments, announcing net zero targets and so on. So what we set out to see through this study is whether financial flows and investments to the power sector show a trend that is compatible with these commitments. So first, I'd like to start with some context on Indonesia. To fulfill Indonesia's ambitious renewable energy targets, there is a need to mobilize investments at an accelerated pace. Indonesia has achieved near universal electrification, but remote rural areas continue to face energy inequalities, lack of access to electricity, and COVID-19 has exacerbated these problems. Indonesia has ambitious policy targets in place. It has a 23% target for renewable energy mix by 2025. It has a 43% renewable energy mix target by 2050, based on one scenario, and another recent scenario by the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources points to an even greater ambition at almost 87% by 2050. So Indonesia will require a fundamental transformation to achieve a clean and just energy transition, but it is currently hampered somewhat by existing subsidies to fossil fuels, uncompetitive feed-in tariffs, and locked-in coal investments. And we'll see how this plays out in financing trends in our study. So current financing falls short of required financing needs. Indonesia needs about 5 to 13 billion in annual investments, but tracked annual investments only reached about 2.7 billion. So public finance is needed, especially to intervene, to de-risk, to make private investments more attractive. But fiscal capacity has been limited, especially since COVID. So we do need more private sector participation through innovative financing schemes. Next slide, please. So the study that we've just completed shows that Indonesia's electricity sector financing is as a whole dominated by financing to fossil fuels, mainly to coal. But between 2016 and 2019, we saw an interesting trend where finance to coal was actually decreasing. It was dropping. And between 2017 and 2019, finance to renewables was increasing. So this was quite a steady trend until 2020 kicked in. So in 2020, we saw a reversal of both trends. Renewable energy dropped a little and fossil fuel increased again. And we attribute this reversal of the trend to a number of incidents that occurred in the remarkable year of 2020. Number one is that there was lower energy demand during COVID-19, so it made new investments less attractive. Number two, there was very little support for the renewable energy sector in the government's economic recovery stimulus package. And there was quite a bit of support. There was quite a lot of support for incumbent industries that were high emissions industries in that same package. Number three, government policy signals, while being more and more supportive of renewables, it also still continues to support coal industry somewhat by the fact that some projects were still ongoing. Some build out of coal-powered power generation was still ongoing in 2020. Next slide. And most of the financing came from international sources. Particularly from developed finance institutions, which accounted for 65% of all finance commitments to the power sector. In this graph, those are the greens and the light browns and the blues. But if you look at the greens and the browns, which are international finance for fossil fuels, you'll see a key turnaround in 2018 when international finance to fossil fuel-based energy resources, primarily for coal, dropped. And this drop was significant. It was a drop of about 68% over the period of 2018 to 2020. And this is driven by a shift in market preference and global policy signals to align financing with Paris Agreement objectives. This trend continues onward to 2020. So we can see that all the way up to 2020, international finance for coal is drying up. However, domestic finance to coal remains. Next slide. Now, 78% of financial commitments to the power sector came in the form of debt financing instruments, mostly commercial loans. Now, we also see a shift in commercial financier preferences here. From 2016 to 2018, there is a decrease of commercial financing to fossil fuels. And by 2019, 2020, it's become vanishingly small. At the same time, there is an increase of commercial financing to renewables. So this also shows a shift in market preferences. And this is mainly, we attribute this to primarily regulatory signals in the financial sector, such as the Financial Services Authority regulation on the implementation of sustainable finance for financial services, and also OJK regulation on green bonds. PLN also had an announcement on a moratorium of coal-fired power starting in 2023, which all adds up to, I think, impacting the market's appetite for coal financing. We also see here that development finance institutions are increasingly starting to phase out financing to fossil fuels as well. For instance, the EU Investment Bank, KfW, AFD, indicated that it will no longer finance any coal, oil, or diesel fuel plants in its low carbon plan, and that also shows up in this finance flow trend. Next slide. Interestingly, 2/3 of all that finance to renewables is going into geothermal and hydropower projects. These also happen to be the two renewable energy sectors with the highest installed capacity in Indonesia to date. Solar panels, visualized here in yellow, is tiny. It makes up less than 2% of all investments into renewable energy. Now, the low volume of commercial debt finance to solar-based energy technologies is surprising, given that it has such a compelling value proposition. Solar panels are modular. They're able to provide an effective renewable source of electricity quickly across Indonesia's expansive geography. It has multiple deployment options. We can deploy it mini grid or as a utility grid or as off grid. And solar technology is now more cost effective, with prices for solar panels dropping globally by 82% over the last decade. In addition, the Ministry of Energy ranks solar energy as a priority in its energy transition program, given that it is a renewable energy source with the largest capacity generating potential identified in Indonesia. So there really is a lot of opportunity in solar panel development, but there needs to be more done to unlock that investment. Next slide. Now, we've also placed all these financial flows into the context of meeting net zero targets. We want to know whether they are enough or at least are on a trend towards reaching sufficient investment. And I need to note here that Indonesia has issued a number of scenarios for energy mix targets in 2050 and 2060. So for example, Indonesia issued a long-term strategy document, which has a scenario of 43% renewable energy mix by 2050. But the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources has also prepared a scenario that reaches 86% renewable energy by 2050 and 87% by 2060, even 100% by 2060 if they also include new energy, not just renewable energy. So this is essentially what we call the net zero plan for the energy sector. And this was announced late last year by the ministry. As it announced, it was planning or was preparing to launch a roadmap to net zero emission by 2060. So I have to note here that it hasn't been officially launched in its entirety, but the principal 5-year milestones and investment plans have already been publicly announced, and Ministry of Energy officials have provided detailed presentations that lay out, targets for renewable energy, capacity additions, fossil fuel decrease, even quantitative projections of investment needs to meet the 2060 goal. So we've based our estimations throughout this study on that roadmap, very detailed roadmap prepared by the Ministry of Energy. And the result is that we still have quite a long way to go. We need an exponential increase in RE capacity to meet net zero targets. Solar power is by far the most laggard, needing to be scaled up by more than 500 times its current capacity. Next slide. And what that means for current investment trends is that investment in renewables are predicted to underachieve. We now have about $2.7 billion in committed investments, but what is needed is around 16 billion. So we have a gap of about 13.4 billion in underinvestment, and solar energy investments in particular need to grow exponentially. Next slide. Another key finding is that even though fossil fuel finance is generally decreasing, there is still enough of it at the moment to put us on a path of overinvestment in fossil fuels. And this is an overinvestment of about $0.2 billion annually. So in order to make sure finance flows are in line with Paris Agreement and net zero targets, there does need to be more effort in making sure investments flow to renewables. So maybe make more effort in making sure that renewables are incentivized, risky areas de-risked so that investment flows more aggressively in that area. But at the same time, fossil fuel also needs to be disincentivized so that the current international financing trend of moving away from coal finance is consistent and also reflected locally in domestic finance. Last slide. So there are opportunities here for commercial financiers. Number one, shift and align with the Paris Agreement. We need to see more expeditious phasing down of coal financing for fossil fuel to avoid stranded asset risks, given that, as I mentioned before, by 2023, Indonesia has a deadline of no more new coal-fired power plants. Support initiatives that accelerate decommissioning of coal-fired power plants. There's no time to get into that in the current study, but Indonesia has plans to have programs to accelerate the decommissioning of coal-fired power plants, and that's an interesting initiative to support. Number two, explore and invest. So continue expanding the renewable energy portfolio, scaling lending in particular for renewable infrastructure. So we're seeing a lack of financing as well into infrastructure enabling renewable energy like smart grids, energy management systems, and transmission. And also allocate a certain portion of investment portfolios towards low carbon technologies and new business models, such as electric vehicle charging infrastructure and battery exchange stations. Again, infrastructure, very important. Accelerate investments to various customer segments like medium and small micro enterprises and residential and industrial solar rooftops, rooftop solars, and ESCOs, energy service companies, to finance energy efficient technologies in new buildings and retrofits. Lastly, assess and report. So it's important to start integrating climate risk into credit assessments, conduct climate stress testing of own investment portfolio, have measurable and transparent decarbonization targets, and report progress regularly to regulators and investors. And lastly, advise clients on strategies to build a climate resilient portfolio and facilitate a transition to low carbon activities. Thank you very much. I hope that was helpful.
Thank you very much, Tisa. And that was really a great way to frame this discussion and share some, I think, some very interesting and provocative data points that can lead us into a fuller discussion with our esteemed panelists. We have about 20 to 25 minutes, so I do want to get to our panelists immediately. I'd like to first introduce the three of them. We have the pleasure of having with us Mr. Charles Koh, Head of International Subsidiary Banking with HSBC Indonesia, and we certainly appreciate HSBC's partnership in this particular knowledge brief on Indonesia. We have with us Ms. Kamya Handayani, who is Vice President of Climate Change and Safeguards at PLN, a very important actor in this energy transition. And finally, we have Mr. Harris Yaya, Director of Geothermal, and geothermal was mentioned, was highlighted quite a bit in Tisa's presentation, at the Directorate General of New Renewable Energy and Energy Conservation, Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources. Three very important perspectives, but I would like to start with the commercial finance side of this discussion, and would ask Charles to first start sharing some thoughts. And if I can, I'd like to focus first on one of the graphs which showed a very promising uptick in terms of commercial finance of renewable energy, which then just dropped off in 2020. We have you with us. What can you share with us in terms of what the current short and medium term outlook looks like from HSBC's side? Because we don't operate in a vacuum. We have to operate in a context. This is the context that we have right now. Where do you see things going in the short and medium term? And which clean energy sectors do you think are poised to go to scale in Indonesia right now?
Well, thanks for that, Glenn. Let me break it up into two segments itself. First thing first, I think Indonesia is blessed. We are rich in resources and well-known given its dominance in export of fossil fuel at the moment. But given the energy demand will continue to rise and global market will eventually dictate clean or renewable energy, the next 5 till 10 years will be critical. And Indonesia will need to show significant progress in its energy transition and aligning the actual performance against the targets set to achieve net zero by 2060. And of course, that's come with the share of new and renewable energy in the energy mix to 23% in 2025, up to 100% in 2060 or earlier. And the fact that the energy players will need to reduce their dirty energy portion and at the same time significantly increase the new renewable energy portion. And that creates new investment and financing opportunity, not only on the project itself, but also on the supporting renewable infrastructure. Geothermal may still be dominant, but the solar, as indicated in the research, will gain momentum as the current energy generation is still very small. And there is actually revised regulation to incentivize the deployment and installation of solar rooftop, both for residential and industrial. I think that's significant. We see some investment flow specific to solar rooftop project. And it is also be interesting to witness CapEx related to project redesign, new climate tech, new capability, an area pretty much where HSBC has pretty much invested as well, not only in Indonesia perspective, but across Asia region. But like what the research alluded to earlier, pretty much it requires significant financing. That's the role that pretty much global financial institution like HSBC is proactively leading the market with. And at the same time, we also need to embrace multi-stakeholder partnership and collaboration, not only across public, private, but also government. I think the holistic approach will be a key message and approach that we need to pretty much portray further.
Thank you very much, Charles. And perhaps I'll come back with another point that you're putting on the table in a second. But one thing that you mentioned was the importance of solar for industrial use. And I'd like to take that as a lead-in over to Kamya at PLN, because PLN certainly, as I mentioned, is a very important player. You have customers who are domestic, who are commercial, who are industrial. How would you see the role of your industrial customers and the role of industry in this energy transition? Because we often talk about whole of economy effort. How does PLN see the role of industry in this effort?
Thank you very much, Glenn, for the question, and thank you for having me here. So, industry, including also PLN, if we also include PLN as industry, I would say that plays a critical role in energy transitions. For PLN as a utility companies owned by the government, we also have the obligations not only to create revenue, but also to a public service obligations, which is to provide universal access to electricity, but at the same time also needs to make sure our contribution to Indonesian NDC. So that's why in our electricity supply business plan, we always follows the mandate from the government. For example, we have to make sure that 23% of renewable energy mix by 2025. And we have to make sure the achievement of Indonesian NDC in the power sector by 2030. But also not only in the supply side, not only in the PLN side, other industrial sector, for example, manufacturer sector, they also become actively contributing to energy transition. For example, PLN in 2020 launched renewable energy certificates, which is a market-based instrument that can be used by industry to meet their, especially if they are part of the RE100 companies. So we have seen in a very increasing demand on REC. For example, this year we only targeted 500 gigawatt hour of REC, but the current MOUs or the current agreement already exceed this number. Only this year is only April this year. So it means that industry also becomes very interested in renewable energy, and if we talk about solar, solar is quite they have a good very temptation towards solar. For example, we have an ongoing project on floating solar PV in Java. So this project is very interested for customers. Yeah, so we even can choose if we want to make it as REC or green tariff, because the customer are willing to choose this project for their as their portfolio. So that's I will end it here. So the customer is really keen to renewable energy provided by PLN.
Excellent. No, I think those are very, very important points in terms of how you engage, and certainly the renewable energy certificates could be an extremely interesting mechanism to encourage that. What I'd like to ask then, Director Harris, Yaya, is, we need scale, and Indonesia has, I think, played an extremely important role, not only by leading by example, and I know that's what President Joko likes to say oftentimes, 2060 or sooner, but Indonesia also has the G20 presidency, as your background reminds us, this year, which is an extremely important role to have at this moment in time. The IEA reminds us that we do have the technology available to achieve net zero. We just have to put it into place. What is the ministry doing in terms of looking at this challenge of scale, of using all technologies available, and making sure that you're meeting these ambitious targets? What is some perspective from your side, Mr. Harris?
Thank you, Mr. Glenn. So I would like to share some information related to how Indonesia tried to accelerate the renewable energy to achieve our mitigation action. So I think net zero emission is one of our target. The second target also is we try to meet our target for the mitigation. CO2 mitigation under the Paris Agreement goal. So, and then the third target is we try to achieve the 23% of renewable energy implementation by 2025. So all of these targets we try to achieve by implementing the regulation, implementing incentive, and many other support from the government, and also including the cooperation with the other parties. And especially for the implementation to achieve the net zero emission target. So some strategy that the government already tried to do, but now I would like to inform that so far there is no legal regulation available for net zero emission strategy, but still on the draft of a roadmap. But we already identify some activity that we try to do. The first activity is a gradually retirement of coal-fired power plant. So I think the previous speaker also mentioned about this. And we has about 40 gigawatt of implementation of coal power plant, and we try to reduce and then retire this power plant until 2060, because our target of net zero emission is 2060. And the second strategy is acceleration of new renewable energy development, especially solar and wind, because Indonesia has a large potential of wind, solar, hydro, and also for the bioenergy, geothermal. So all of these renewable energy we try to develop optimally. So for example, is a hydro now is implementation is less than 10,000 megawatt, and we try to accelerate until 80,000 megawatt. Similarly with the geothermal, because Indonesia is one of the largest geothermal resource in the world. So we try to develop until 18,000 megawatt. So but now it's about 2,300 megawatts is already implemented. And the solar PV and also wind is challenging, because like the previous speaker also mentioned that now is acceleration is very low, but for the next in our RPTL, so this is 10 years planning of electricity, we try to accelerate very significantly of solar PV to and then including also for the rooftop solar and wind power. So we try to accelerate this until 2030 and after 2030. And for the geothermal, especially for geothermal, we have also special incentive like government drilling. So this is one of the new incentive in Indonesia to accelerate the geothermal implementation. So government drilling means the risk of geothermal in the exploration sector will be done by the government before the project offered to the private company. And then another strategy to achieve net zero emission is more efficient use of technology, and encouraging the use of electric vehicle. So we are also has very ambitious target for electric vehicle to replace the use of internal combustion vehicle. And then we are also trying to accelerate the implementation of electric stove, because now Indonesia also very high can depend on import of LPG. So we try to reduce also the use of LPG by converting to electric stove. Another strategy is to accelerate the smart grid implementation, because if we develop more solar, PV, wind, or wind power, we know that this kind of energy is intermittent, variable renewable energy. So we need to stabilize the system, and then this is the need the smart grid to be implemented. But for the short term, we are now trying to complete the president regulation related to the pricing of renewable energy to accelerate also the part of acceleration effort of renewable energy. So all of these activity we try to do as much as possible to achieve the target of emission reduction and also to achieve the net zero emission. Thank you.
Very clear, Director Jaya. Thank you very much for some of those important points. In the sense of looking over your 10-year plan and looking at how many different renewable energy technologies are being pursued, I'd like to bring Charles back into the conversation because one thing, and I think Director Harris said it well. He said, okay, these are the public targets. We want to encourage private sector to come in. Private sector will then turn around to HSBC and say, okay, we need some financing to help us with this. Can you give us a sense of what are some of the innovations in financing mechanisms, financing tools that you're interested in either seeing or having space to explore in order to be helpful with this 10-year plan, this 10-year target of renewable energy?
Okay, thanks, Glenn. I think from financing perspective, let's get with some stats first. I think government estimated a budget of 24 billion per year to fulfill the net zero target by 2060. While historically across 2018 and 2020, government only allocated an average annual budget of 7.2 billion. So there is a big gap here, and pretty much that indicate that pretty much we need to step up in terms of the support, and private sector support is critical. And please don't forget the FDI element, as they will play a critical factor. Now, going back pretty much to the financial innovation itself, pretty much they are available in market. A lot of green and sustainable financing solution is emerging and developing, and the growth rate has been massive. Conventional banking solution from loans, trade facility, bonds can be structured as green or sustainable, provided that they adhere to the government product pillars. For green loan, typically there is an international standard called GLP, while pretty much on sustainable, there is another standard called SLPP. So pretty much that's pretty clear. And in the market, we can see that, take into example, HSBC supported the government of Indonesia in the development of its inaugural green framework back in 2017, and with green bonds and sukuk issued every year under this framework. That's huge. And another example is that the support that we provided to government of Indonesia in the issuance of its inaugural SDG bond as well. That's pretty much allowed the government to raise 500 million to finance environmental and social projects. And another way or angle to look at is that many infrastructure projects in the region face varying degrees of barrier due to bankability, right? Private capital can play a unique role in bridging this gap. For instances, we partnered with Temasek to launch a USD 150 million seed-funded debt financing platform dedicated exactly for this purpose. And of course, the trajectory is to scale this up to achieve up to 1 billion in private sector investment at this stage. And again, the target will be towards reducing greenhouse gas emission by funding renewable energy project generation, and the scope will get expanded as we go through time. There are many other initiatives. Pretty much there is the partnership with ADB on energy transition mechanism, pretty much a climate innovation as well that we are doing with one organization, and a couple of structure transaction as well. In short, even when we look at public data, back in 2021, actually we are seeing an increase in terms of the total bond issue out of Indonesia market. Actually, 21% of it is structured as sustainable bonds. Compared to in 2020, I think it's only pretty much 10%. So we can see that there is an increase in terms of demand, and even from private perspective, we are seeing more and more corporates are looking into green and sustainable type of financing as they incorporate ESG metrics into their business and financing decision.
Those are very encouraging words, Charles, in terms of how you see things already shifting in terms of green financing. We have the targets, we have the financing, and we only have a few more minutes, but I would like to ask Kamya to come in and help us understand a bit how this power sector landscape that will be changing. As I mentioned earlier, we need to get ready for what Indonesia looks like in 2040 and 2050. What are some of the key challenges that PLN is anticipating as you look at this new power landscape?
Okay, thank you for the question. So if you look at the PLN roadmap to net zero emissions, we can see that, of course, in the future, we will have more renewable energy. And also, we will also look at new technology like carbon capture and storage to also abate CO2 emission. So some of these technologies, like energy storage system, is still not very much adopted in Indonesia. So that's why the cost at this moment is still very expensive. So I think the unlocks that we need to make it feasible or can be adopted in a large scale is to have to have the transfer technology from the technology transfer from the leader of this technology. And also, of course, financing is also a very critical issue, like what we are discussing right now. This is a very critical point. And we also have learned to anticipate this. We also have discussed with, including with HSBC, regarding the intention of PLN to issue sustainable link loan or sustainable link bond. So this is also some financing mechanism that we also look into to accelerate our target towards net zero emissions. Also, in terms of policy, of course, we also need support from the policy perspective. For example, Pak Yahya already mentioned regarding the electric vehicle, for example, in the downstream side. Because the supply side, we are moving from fossil fuel-based power generations to more renewable-based power generations. So that's why the carbon intensity of the power sector will be reduced gradually, even if with the current emission intensity, electric vehicle is already making contribution in reducing emissions. So policy on accelerating the adoption of electric vehicle will also help in absorbing the new energy supply from renewable energy, because one of the situation that we have right now is we have the oversupply of electricity, but we also want to make sure that we meet the 23% of renewable energy by 2025. So it means that we have to keep developing renewable energy even with the current oversupply of electricity. And that's why we also have the roadmap for the coal moratorium, and also to retire coal early. Pak Ko mentioned on the energy transition mechanism. So we are with the ADB is doing a feasibility study on how we can do the pilot project for retiring coal power plant earlier than its lifetime. So yeah, so in brief, we need policy support, financial support, and also technology support.
Thank you very much, Kamya. And unfortunately, we are out of time for this very engaged discussion. The good news is that we'll be exploring this topic further at the upcoming SEforALL Global Forum that takes place 17th to 19th of May in Rwanda. And we do have the confirmation from Honorable Minister Arifin to join us there in Rwanda in person. So we're certainly looking forward to that. Thank you very much to the esteemed panelists, Charles Koh from HSBC, Kamya Handayani from PLN, Harris Yahya from Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources, a very high level of discussion. And of course, thank you, Tisa, for setting up that discussion with your presentation. I'd like to now shift quickly into, and perhaps someone can mute on their side. I'd like to shift quickly into part 2 of this webinar. And this would lead us to the case of China. Sorry, the case of India. And the case of India is extremely important in terms of where the world goes on its net zero pathway. And I'd like to first invite our colleague from CPI, Xavi Mitel, Senior Analyst at Climate Policy Institute, to present some of the findings from this knowledge brief. Xavi, over to you, please.
Thank you, Glenn. Let me just start by saying it's a pleasure to be here today. We have some excellent panelists who are really at the forefront of energy transition issue in India in many different ways. So very, very excited to be contributing to this discussion. I'll quickly start with giving you a brief overview of what the findings from our brief. As Glenn mentioned earlier, this brief really follows from Climate Policy Initiative and Sustainable Energy for All annual series since 2017 called the Energizing Finance, where we used to track finance flows towards SDG 7 in sub-Saharan Africa and Asian countries, of which India was also a part, hopefully until now. What we saw in these various editions of the report that India has showed success in progressing towards the near universal literacy access in recent years. So what we did, we took a step forward with this brief and looked what these power sector investments meant for India's transition and Paris alignment, and with the aim to really identify the different challenges and opportunities that exist in the power sector.
Excuse me, Xavi? Hi,
Yeah.
Here is Maya. I don't know whether it's the issue with all other participants, but there is an echo in your audio as if the sound is coming from 2 microphones or something. Could you just check whether everything is okay?
Sure, is it better? Probably I'll stop my video if that helps, but do you think it's better now?
No, are you perhaps connected with 2 devices?
Not really, actually. Let me try to keep my phone away. Is the echo still there?
Yes, it is.
Okay. That's weird. Is it any better now?
No.
Oh.
Well,
Want to try earphones might help.
Yeah. Ravi, perhaps you can try to mute and unmute yourself, and like Swati said, try with earphones.
Log out and log in.
Is it better now?
no, it isn't, but I guess that you can continue.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, I don't know. Put off my headphones as well. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so what I was saying was that India has ambitious renewable energy targets in place. For instance, at the recently concluded COP India announced a target of 500 gigawatt of non-fossil fuel energy capacity by 2030 and also achieving net zero by 2070. But to achieve those targets, to maintain the energy access we've received, the progress we've received, to achieve energy security and ensure a clean energy transition, there's a clear need to mobilize greater investments, and that is what the country is currently witnessing. Just to give you a bit of sense of the numbers that we have and in what we track finance commitments to India's power sector average around $14 billion annually between 2030 and 2090, compared to the current need of $35 to $50 billion per year, according to various estimates that we see. The good story is, yes, renewable energy investment continue to account for the largest portion of this finance, aligning with India's ambitious renewable energy targets. However, despite the potential stranded assets risk, track investments in coal power projects will still account for around 15% of the total track commitments in the sector in 2019, and that's really the teal blue shade on the left graph that you see. In terms of actors, large domestic actors, including private developers and public sector enterprises, have been instrumental in driving renewable energy deployment in India. encouraged by these various policy incentives. And all these renewable energy investments have really led India to achieve significant progress towards its NDCs under the Paris Agreement. In fact, India is expected to meet the targets much before the set 2030, especially the goal of increasing the non-fossil fuel capacity share to 40% of the non-power generation capacity by 2030. We are already literally there, like, the installed capacity from renewable energy, we already have like around 38% and probably more. This was like a brief that we did. So we probably have more updated numbers on that. But what is striking is that fossil fuel continues to remain the mainstay of India's electricity generation mix and still account for three-fourths or 75% of its total generation. And more is under planning. Just to give you the idea, see the gray part there. The last 3 bars shows the cost optimal capacity mix by the end of 2029 and 30, which would actually add up around 6.5 gigawatt per annum net of retirements during the whole this whole decade. And this is despite the potential of stranded assets, right? We have seen the whole history of underutilized coal power load factor, which is averaged around 58% between 2017 and 2021. We also have identified 40 gigawatts as stressed assets, and due to innovative reasons like non-availability of fuel or lack of purchasing power agreements, tariff disputes, etc. There's been all these different reasons for them being identified as stressed assets. And also the Indian banking sector is non-performing or standard assets for thermal generation sector were estimated around 40 to 60 billion as well. So yeah, that's concerning, right? As I mentioned, that what we did was took a step forward with the track investments and see what it meant in terms of relation to the temperature scenarios. I want to go into the details of the methodology, which is provided there in the brief, and hopefully the link has been shared as well in the chat. So happy to discuss it as well. But the main idea was to first, we applied a methodology where we first defined the level of carbon intensity associated with different temperature pathways based on pathway-specific carbon budgets for India's power sector, and then compare the carbon intensity of those investments that we saw in 2019 with the target carbon intensity threshold for any future additional investments for these different temperature scenarios. And this really leads us to, try to see where India stands in terms of various alignment status. So whether it's aligned, somewhat misaligned, very misaligned, extremely misaligned. And when we say extremely misaligned, it's corresponding to a temperature scenario of more than 3 degrees, 3.2 degrees. And the main findings that we have is that the financing of coal power projects corresponds to a temperature rise well above the 3.2 degrees Celsius, which makes them extremely misaligned. What does that mean, basically? To realign the overall fleet of the power sector fleet with Paris Agreement goal, and that's really the IEA's sustainable development scenario, we need not only to reduce emissions from new generation, but also to offset locked-in emission sources. And that would mean massive investments required not in only zero carbon generation, but also actively removing emissions to compensate for the carbon emissions that are there in the existing locked-in fleet to kind of achieve Paris alignment. Also, we need to action to accelerate the decommissioning and replacement of existing high carbon capacity, and doing that in a just transition way. And yeah, that is a tricky part, and happy to hear the panelist's point of view there as well. And this is really not to take away from the recent steps in the positive direction. A lot of public and private actors are committed to low carbon transition, net zero carbon targets, and they need to, they really need to transform their commitments into actions and rather quickly. And we also saw, several actors who've been committing are also still adding coal-based assets to their portfolio, which is definitely counterproductive to the whole commitments that they're doing and the progress they're making towards it. In terms of opportunities, based on what we've seen in terms of track investments, we listed a couple of potential opportunities for financials, commercial financials, to support India's transition, and very happy to hear what panelists would have to say as well, more on these aspects. But one is definitely shift and align. Commercial financials to align their financial activities and lending policies and practices with the Paris Agreement. And part of it is also expeditiously phasing down coal financing and refinancing as well. That is going directly or indirectly towards construction of power plants, new power plants, or refurbishment or even expansion of existing fossil fuel plants. And given really the the cross-cutting nature of the energy sector, even lending to upstream activities like coal mining or other sectors like transport, which could be using a lot of coal power generation, should be progressively restricted by financiers. In terms of investing, yes, definitely we need to continue expanding the renewable energy portfolio along with investment targeting. Flexibility of energy systems. We do see a lot of opportunities in interstate and interregional transmission infrastructure to trade electricity across states, energy storage, and pumped up storage, hydro, and deployment of smart grids, and a lot of distributed energy sources as well. Institutions should also consider allocating a sort of minimum portion of their lending portfolio towards energy innovation projects, new business models that have been, that has shown commercial viability, like battery storage or low carbon, hydrogen, electricity, vehicle charging infrastructure, electricity, EVs are sort of in nascent stage, but these are certain areas that we definitely need to be exploring more. Also, the financial institutions should introduce and expand their exposure to other segments as well. So we do see, we've kind of, there was a report that said energy efficiency investment potential in India is around 150 billion, which still remains to be untapped largely. We have the rooftop solars for both residential, commercial installations, even MSME sectors. Agriculture, for instance, which accounts for 20% of electricity consumption, comes mostly from fossil fuel-based grids, and that too at a subsidized rate would really benefit receiving financing for, say, for instance, solar PV powered pumps. Also, leveraging different blending financing infrastructures like the USISF facility, which provides a pipeline of commercially viable investment opportunities in the RE space. We also have seen, the ESCOs have demonstrated the commercial viability, like the credit lines via development financial institutions to sort of build the technical capacity in the sector and kind of meet the energy efficiency needs. So yes, we need to sort of explore all these a little more to kind of mobilize both, not only just leverage the public sector finance more effectively, but mobilize greater private finance. And last but not least is, of course, I think that's something we CAPI really kind of stresses also assessment report. So financial institutions need to continue better reporting their stakeholders, including risk assessment of their portfolios, to transition fiscal risk. That they see it's not only important to look at what the emissions are that are financed by the commercial banks, but also, have these forward-looking and scenario-based assessments to increase transparency on reporting for, various climate finance-related disclosures. And last but not least is also another, advising clients strategies to build a more climate-resilient portfolio and facilitate transition to low-carbon activities. So I'll stop here. Yes, definitely look forward to the excellent panel discussion, and I'm so sorry for the audio problem that we have. Sorry. So yeah, just passing on to Glenn now.
Yes, thank you very much, Chavi, and apologies to all the participants on the webinar, but these things happen. But thanks for carrying on, Chavi. It was very informative. And these are some very important points that I think will be able to lead us to this discussion. I would like to introduce the three panelists that we have today. Ms. Swati Agraval, Associate Director for Global Banking from HSBC, is with us. We have Mr. Dhruba Purkayastha, India Director for Climate Policy Initiative. And we have Pavan Agrawal, Chief Financial Officer of Azure Power. So three very important perspectives from the financing, from the policy, and from a leading renewable power producer in India who's in the trenches trying to put all these pieces together and make it work. I'd like to start with Swati. And Swati, one of the things that jumps out to me in terms of looking at the India case is that India has already been able to attract a lot of financing for its electrification effort, for its solar effort. but clearly we need a lot more, especially if there's a 450 gigawatt or 500 gigawatt target for 2030. From your perspective, what is needed to boost these levels of foreign investment that will be required to move the needle on these ambitious targets?
Sure, sure. Thank you for the opportunity to be part of this discussion. I think clearly India, it's a large country, and the needs of the country in terms of the investment that's required is very large. We have seen a significant change in the approach towards renewables in the last 5 to 7 years. A lot of innovative structures have actually come into the market. A lot of investors, foreign investors, have actually shown interest as well, in investing into the Indian market. I think HSBC has also played a very key role in, mobilizing these funds within the Indian system. I think we have actually helped a lot of our customers in raising green bonds from the FCY market, and we are one of the top ones in terms of the DCM related activity that we have. Apart from that, there's an equity capital market channel as well, which is developing in the country. Clearly, the needs are a lot, and not one section of the financing community can actually cater to the needs. So a bank or an NBFC would not be enough, so it has to be a combination of all these factors. So what HSBC's key role has been is that we have been discussing with a lot of regulators, with the regulators in various countries, and industry players. We have formed working groups and alliances to build this transition financing pathway into the country. We have definitely seen a lot of change in the last 5 to 7 years, like I mentioned earlier. And we expect that, in terms of how banks, NBFCs, and investors understand this sector, the appetite on this sector is increasing. So definitely there is that pathway there. In addition to it, HSBC has also partnered with ADB on energy transition mechanism. So it provides a pathway to connect with multilateral agencies who are investing in different emerging economies and learn from their experience. Do transactions which are more secure and structured in a better way. HSBC has also committed around 100 million investment to accelerate green technologies by Breakthrough Energy Catalyst. And definitely our endeavor is to make all our customers understand the requirement and, the requirement to move into a more energy transition, in a green energy transition way, especially in sectors like steel, transportation, power and utilities. We have also done a sustainability linked loan, a syndicated sustainability linked loan, which was first in the country. And we have been the lead arrangers for that, which has targets of reduction in emissions, waste water management, has set targets. So definitely there is a roadmap that's there, and HSBC wants to, provide that platform to our customers to develop that further.
Thank you very much, Swati, and we'll come back to you in a few minutes. But Dhruba, to kind of zoom out a bit from that perspective and look across the energy sector in India, which is very diverse, which has its own supply chains, which has its own challenges in terms of its own supply chains. Where do you see the opportunities over the next 10 years if we're thinking about this 500 gigawatt target? And where would you advise we start looking for unlocking untapped capital that will be needed? You're still on mute, Dhruba.
Thanks, Glenn. And thank you for having me here, SEforALL. Am I audible? Can you hear me clearly? Okay, thank you. So a great question, Glenn. I mean, where do I see opportunities in this quantum jump transformation to 500 gigawatt from where we are in today? Yeah, that's huge. That's a huge, huge leap. But before you go there, well, if it were to happen, of course, there is a
huge scale on the supply chain manufacturing of solar. And the way India is moving into this four-stage, I would say four-stage value addition in solar manufacturing. And given that there are some structural and some international sanctioned issues on particular region from where 90% of solar panels come from, you are surely going to see a huge manufacturing supply chain on solar shape up. So that's one of the points. And whether it is driven by a particular region getting sanctioned by capital, or by developers, or combination of both, or even if things were to be so, this is a huge leap from 200 to 500 that would need significant ramp up in domestic capacity at various stages. I'm not too sure if you will go down, India will be able to make the cells, but yeah, arrays, panels, and subsequent value addition. So that's your value chain where there will be significant opportunity. The second one, and this is on opportunity. Given that India is already at 40%, okay, India's NDC commitments were 40% capacity renewable by 2030. India is already at 39% capacity. So let's understand in terms of NDC commitments on capacity, whether that's electricity or not. I am not talking about electricity, but commitment was on capacity. And so the commitment on capacity is even going up further. So therefore, where I see a bottleneck is on the grid being able to absorb that amount of electricity, which is infirm power. Can you make it firm, solar energy? Well, you can, but you need a huge investment in grid level storage. Technologically possible. So therefore, here comes the next value chain on storage. And you have three large global manufacturing companies setting up storage capacity in India. Tesla is also talking. So we don't know whether Tesla will be there, but yeah. So we are talking about a massive requirement of grid storage. Without that, solar power will go waste, because if it does not get dispatched, it is lost at that point of time. So it needs to be stored. So you don't have. The third area would be the smart grids. What you would therefore need is control systems which are there in, let's say, developed markets where you're not allowed to use your washing machine at a particular time of the day. So all these control systems is therefore a backward integration. You will need that smart grid investments to happen. Now, if there were to happen, here lies the value chain opportunities which such scale up of solar will create. The third one and the last part, so these are the three areas where we can think of, and it has one last area I would like to touch upon is the distributed solar portion, because while, as we were talking about India having electrified, suddenly, if I may say so, from 300 million people without access to electricity, with no one without access to electricity, well, there's no one without access to wires, but I'm not too sure if there are access to electrons or not. I am not too sure. Some people claim that it is there. Official Gulf data tells you 98%, which is true, but I'm not too sure of the hours of electricity. So therefore, my prescription over there is rooftop solar, distributed renewable energy, use energy at the point of consumption. So therefore, your losses which you incur in transmitting electricity are minimized. That's an economic waste. So let power producers produce their mini grids, distribute it, integrate it, do whatever is required, get regulation adjusted to it, produce electricity at the point of consumption, at the point of distributed consumption. And that is what I say, distributed renewable energy, rooftop solar, solar home lighting system, solar pumps. You have huge amount of rural productive enterprises, milling, chafing, grains, trading, saving. All those activities can be solarized. And let's remember COVID here, that there is a huge negative economic impact. India will slip at least additional 10 percentage point reduction, increase in people below the poverty line. India had moved from 40% to 20% prior to the pandemic. We will surely see an increase of poverty by another 10%, which is to say that 28% people will slip below the poverty line.
Thank you, Dhruva. That was a very clear outline of what needs to happen, and certainly a very good warning at the end in terms of what may happen as a result of COVID. I would like to contrast both what Swati and Dhruva shared with us with your perspective, Pawan, because when Azure Power starts to do its due diligence on where it wants to continue to be a leader in renewable power generation, huge targets, huge country. Where do you begin? How do you prioritize? Where do you see some of the opportunities from your perspective in terms of the landscape that's opened up between now and 2030?
Thanks, Len. So huge country, huge landscape, and huge opportunities. And especially in the sector we are talking about, especially if you talk about renewables, then definitely the opportunity is huge by all means. And I remember when this entire solar mission was started, talking about having a target of 10 gigawatt, and then suddenly we talk about a target of 100 gigawatt. It was all looking practically impossible, right? And then the way the entire ecosystem was developed, right? The way all the feedback from global investor community were addressed. If you remember, Glenn, one of the critical risk that was being considered, and rightfully so, by all the global investors, was counterparty risk. That your utilities are bleeding, they're not in good financial shape. How the hell will you manage to attract capital for projects which will supply power to the utilities, whom we are not sure whether they'll be able to repay on time or not? And then this entire SECI, Solar Energy Corporation of India, got created. It's a AAA rated entity now, backed by central government, backed by central bank. It has a tripartite agreement. So having a SECI as a counterparty in place, just to make sure that one of the critical risks is mitigated, was one of the very bold steps that was taken by the country. Then a lot of things were eased. For example, the solar park concept was introduced to make sure that a lot of developers, especially the foreign developers who are not very comfortable dealing with the land issues, and how to make sure that they are able to construct a plant and they are able to attract the cheaper capital. So the solar park also supported in a very, very significant manner to begin with. And now, if you look at the entire framework, and thankfully, I think large part of it is also to do with the reduction in polysilicon prices, right? So initially, when the entire solar mission started, people were talking about a tariff of 17-18 rupees INR, right? And thanks to drop in polysilicon prices, drop in corresponding other material prices, overall scale advantage, technological breakthrough, all of this led to now the solar, actually, and even wind, both the sources of power, now they are far cheaper than the conventional source of power. So the way it started, where we need to promote or support solar or wind in the name of renewable purchase obligation, in the name of other clean, green, sustainable, and all other equally valid reasons. Now people are talking about solar or wind as a source of power purely on a commercial basis also, right? So that is something, Glenn, which has led to the growth that we've seen in the past. And again, the growth that Swati and Dhruva talked about. Now we're talking about 500 gigawatt by 2030 in COP26. Again, it looks of very high and tall order. But knowing the way the India is committed towards clean energy, knowing the way we have demonstrated in the past that we do deliver what we commit, and we always keep our ambitions high, we always keep our targets high, and then we do everything possible to try and achieve that. So I'm personally, and as a company also, we are fairly hopeful that the growth path will continue. We'll put up more and more gigawatts as the year progresses. Having said that, of course, there are challenges. A couple of challenges are pretty serious. Besides financing, which shall come, and the challenges include challenges around supply chain, and the way again the government of India is trying to make sure that we are able to make in India. We are able to manufacture modules in India. We are able to manufacture cells in India, and the way they have tried to capture it both by way of tariff barrier as well as non-tariff barrier. So tariff barrier, again, in the name of basic customs duty, BCD, 40% in case you import modules, 25% if you import cells, and 0% if you import wafers. So this tariff barrier, coupled with non-tariff barrier, where you have ALMM, approved list of models and manufacturers. So India is doing again trying to do whatever is possible to make sure that the domestic manufacturing takes place. India becomes over a period self-reliant as far as manufacturing or supply chain is concerned. So those measures are also something which are very important, to actualize. And the way things are progressing, we are very hopeful that it will definitely fall in place. So that is one important thing. Other important, again, where government is putting a lot of effort and planning and capital is the transmission infrastructure. Because being now renewable being a pretty significant source of energy for the grid, and then it being an infirm power. So a lot of work is happening to strengthen the green corridor, to enhance the green corridor. Also trying to see how we make this power more dispatchable. So you are seeing a lot more tenders, not only of pure solar or pure wind, but a lot more tenders around hybrid. Again, solar wind hybrid, storage. The hybrid with storage, or it is with pump storage or battery storage. So government is conscious of all the challenges, and they're trying to address all the challenges in a very clinical manner with a fairly long-term planning to make sure that we are able to reach the target that we have set for ourselves.
And if I could add to that thought, I think there are clearly many other, big initiatives that we won't have time to touch on here, but the One Sun, One World, One Grid, the different efforts. I'm really happy Dhruva mentioned storage, which is going to be incredibly important, if this is going to be a paradigm shift and a permanent paradigm shift. But I'd like, and unfortunately we don't have too much time, but I would like to ask Swati for her reflections on this challenge of from a financier's perspective. You need data, you need to understand the market. What are you doing in terms of any data or information gaps that appear? We know that ESG reporting is moving quickly, and that the Glasgow Finance Alliance for Net Zero is trying to set standards. Give us a perspective of how you operate in an environment where there may be data gaps, there may be information gaps. How do you make your decisions when you're faced with those challenges?
Yeah. So I think first thing that HSBC is aligned to the TCFD climate disclosures. So I think we as a bank want to adhere to that and start publishing that data. I think your question is very much valid in terms of data availability. I think data availability is a big challenge that the banks actually face while assessing climate risk. I think especially the scope 3 data. So SEBI has actually tried to provide a roadmap or a disclosure for all the listed companies to provide data in a particular format. However, the sanctity of the data quality and the emission target reduction targets and how they are measuring that is still not formed in a very in a very proper way, I would say. I think as a bank, there is a challenge wherein, there is limited data and you have to work with that limited data and see whether, so I think conversations with the industry body and the companies actually help us in making those decisions. I think on a one-on-one basis when we actually discuss that, and a lot of information or their plans, which they have, say a 5-year plan or something like that, which they have. So we currently make, decisions basis whatever conversations we can have with the client. But definitely there is a challenge in terms of data availability, which we are also facing as a bank. And I think that needs to be developed, within the country, and we need to have much more disclosures coming in. And this is more so valid for unlisted companies, where, the availability of data becomes more limited.
Thank you very much, Swati. And I would like to give literally 15 seconds to each of you to answer this next provocative question, which is, how optimistic are you that India will achieve its 500 gigawatt target by 2030? Dhruva, if I can start with you, 15 seconds, please, sir. Muted, you're muted.
So if the track record shows that we reach 40% of what NDC commitments are, and most of our presumptions are based on what track record we have seen, I would remain optimistic.
Okay, so there's one optimist on the panel. Pavan, over to you. 15 seconds, please.
Oh, definitely. I'm very, very optimistic. It is easier. It appears to be easier target than what we set a few years back when it was to go from 10 to 100.
Yes.
So definitely fairly optimistic.
Thank you, Pavan. And Swati?
No, definitely optimistic. I think Government of India is doing a lot in terms of, rationalizing everything and helping the sector grow. So definitely optimistic. And I think banks have to play a great role in that, and definitely looking forward for that.
Excellent. Well, there's a very optimistic consensus here, which is going to be helpful for the rest of the world as well. Thank you very much, Pavan Agrawal from Azure Power, Swati Agrawal from HSBC, and Dhruva Purkayashta from CPI. And thank you to Chavi also for setting up this very interesting discussion around our knowledge brief, SEforALL and CPI's knowledge brief on the power sector finance flows aligned with Paris Agreement goals, the case of India. And with that, I'd like to bring to a conclusion this webinar. I would like to thank each one of our presenters, panelists from Indonesia, from India. We do have this research available on our websites at SEforALL.org, climatepolicyinitiative.org as well. We do look forward to seeing as many of you as possible at the upcoming SEforALL Global Forum, once again taking place in May, next month, exactly 1 month from now, in Kigali, Rwanda. See you there. And thanks once again for joining us for this webinar on the Paris alignment of power sector finance, India and Indonesia. Thank you.